A penny in a quilt block, quilting to win World War II. Another title for this presentation could be American and Canadian Benevolent Quilt Making During World War II by the Red Cross, the IODE, which is the Imperial Order of the Daughters of the Empire, Bundles for Britain, and the World War II Mothers. A penny in a quilt block was presented at Red Cross meetings of the Raymond chapter of the Red Cross, Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada in 1943. Attendance was encouraged, essential, and expected, with roll call taken at each meeting. Of this Red Cross chapter had fulfilled their goal by making a quilt every 2 months, with members donating 10 cents each month to defer their expenses. This is a Canadian poster from the war years. For Canadian women, World War II began in September 1939 as their men pressed into service to defend Great Britain in the European theater. American soldiers and sailors were also being deployed as early as 1939 in support of our European allies. Homefront volunteers in America followed the example of their Canadian counterparts and provided essentials of life, such as food, clothing, and medical care for refugees and our soldiers through the Red Cross beginning around 1940. They also raised money to fund the organization, pay for supplies, and all the goods sent to war-torn nations. So on the World War II memorial is engraved, "Women who stepped up were measured as citizens of the nation, not as women. This was a people's war and everyone was in it." And this poster reflects in 1942, the defense industry contribution on the home front. Every man, woman, and child is a partner. In 1942, they were responsible for 60,000 planes, 45,000 tanks, 20,000 guns, and 8 million tons of ship. And when women entered the defense industries, they realized that they had talents from their homemaking skills to bring into the defense industry. And there was a very smooth transition for many of them. And I love this particular poster. It's a tradition with us, mister. So women also brought their sewing skills, and the next 3 slides reflect that. Women that are frequently referred to as Rosies brought their sewing skills also to the defense industry. And this poster is another poster that reflects the World War II effort on the home front. Here you have the motif of the sewing machine, the warring images inside the sewing machine, and then "Sew for Victory." On June 3rd, 1944, in the Northwest Arkansas Times, Fayetteville, Arkansas, women were urged to turn their quilting into a war weapon. Quilt and comfort making is a very old art, but it took the working ability of the Booger Hollow Home Demonstration Club in Pope County to turn into a modern warfare weapon, according to Mabel Russell, home demonstration agent. The women of Booger Hollow community decided after war was declared that they would buy bonds as a club project. 7 $25 bonds at present are owned by the club. Most of the bonds have been bought with money earned by piecing and selling quilts and comforts. Club members buy prints for lining and cotton and thread at an average cost of $1.50 per comfort. The quilts sell from $3.50 to $7.50 each. Meeting in a group in their homes, the women make 2 comforts in a half day. and that was published in the Northwest Arkansas Times on June 3rd, 1944. This effort, this quilt is an example of the fundraising effort during the war. This quilt was made by the Women's Society of Christian Service, and this is from Oklahoma. And the pattern is called Wheel of Fortune. People would pay money to have their name signed on the quilt, and then the quilt would be raffled. So it was sort of a double fundraising. And here you can see on this block, the WSCS, the Women's Society of Christian Service, and then the date of 1943. Another quilt that is a fundraising quilt that depicts the effort on the home front to raise monies is this one. This quilt is from Minnesota. And in the close-up, you can see that the names of the president, the treasurer, the secretary are listed, and also the dates of 1942, 1943, which are during the war years. And then this is another example of a Wheel of Fortune fundraising quilt. This one is from Hazleton, Pennsylvania. And there is a block that records the connection with the soldiers that were lost during the war in memory of our boys in the armed forces. And then there's another block on there that records for Gold Star families. And this particular quilt is from Kansas and Oklahoma. And a close-up of that indicates that this also lists the parents of Gold Star boys. So these were all fundraising quilts during the war years. And this is a fundraising quilt from Canada. This quilt was created by Margaret Bishop, and she was of the family of the Eaton department stores in Canada. The quilt was conceived by Margaret Bishop. She was the wife of Billy Bishop, who was a famous World War I pilot. And on this quilt are the names of celebrities, American celebrities from movie stars. You can see on this first one a number of movie stars, Paul Martin. There's, let's see, let me increase the size of this. Lionel Barry, a number of those. If you advance another, this is another block with Clark Gable, Greer Garson, Nelson Eddy, Hedy Lamarr, Mickey Rooney, Jimmy Stewart, Spencer Tracy. Here we have a block for the Dion quintuplets, which were very popular. And then the next block has the names of Winston Churchill, Clementine Churchill. And then the next block is Walt Disney and a number of other of the movie stars. So this quilt is known as the Canadian Celebrities Quilt, which was a fundraising quilt. It traveled across Canada during the war. It was featured in all of the Eaton department stores, and it raised a lot of money for the war effort. And this is the American equivalent of that. This quilt was made by Mary Jesma Wilson and her mother. And Mary and her mom sent stars, cut out stars, to celebrities. They actually made 3 quilts. This one was red, white, and blue. It traveled with the American Red Cross to raise funds during the war. This is a great image that shows a book about, it's called The American Story. It records all of the travel of the quilt and how much funds it raised. And then with the second set of blocks, stars, that were signed by celebrities, Mary and her mom made 2 more quilts, and these quilts they kept for themselves, and I was fortunate to purchase these quilts a few years ago. But you can see on this block you have the names of Jack Benny, Jane Withers, Edgar Bergen, and Charlie McCarthy, Mickey Mouse, Walt Disney, and Donald Duck. And then more Cary Grant, Ginger Rogers, Rosalind Russell, Orson Welles, Brian Aaron, Joan Fontaine, Betty Davis, Paul Heinried, Bing Crosby, Olivia de Havilland, Maureen O'Hara, and Jimmy Stewart. And of course, my girls, who are the generation after us, don't have a clue who any of these people are, but those of us of the baby boomer generation, we know these names. And this is the second quilt that Mary and her mother made. That is in purple and green, typical colors of the war years. And here are some close-ups of those blocks. Paula Goddard, Bob Hope, Gary Cooper, Spencer Tracy, and Teresa Brewer. Now there's only one block on both these quilts that is dated, and it says Happiness Always, Jane Withers, 1943. And with these quilts is a collection of photographs that each of the celebrities sent to Mary Jesma when she received her stars back after they were signed by the celebrities. So most of the quilting that was done during the war years was made either to honor our veterans. They were either they could have been victory quilts. They were also fundraising quilts. This is a quilt that is owned by Cindy Reynolds. Many of you know Cindy. And it is the American flag and also images of the Red Cross. This quilt was also has signatures on it, and it was signed to raise monies for the war. And here's an image of a Red Cross Collection Center that a PTA in California was managing. And you can see the many quilts that got sent and were then going to be sent to the Low Countries in Britain during the war. So I want to read this to you because I think it shows the spirit of the quilt making during those war years. The Women of Worsley, this was published in the Lethbridge Herald, Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada, November 17, 1941. The Women of Worsley, from the Peace River Record, Monday, October 6th. The Women's Pioneer Club met at the community hall with 10 women present, which was considered very good owing to such bad roads. Only 2 women came in a wagon, the rest having walked or ridden horseback. The above is an extract from the local news of Worsley, reporting a Red Cross meeting held there. When the meeting was held, the roads were axle deep in mud, impassable almost for the wagons. The crops were rotting in the sodden stooks after weeks of rain. But the women of Worsley met to sew on a quilt and plan their future meetings. It is this spirit, this desire to make some sacrificial effort that will beat Hitler. At thousands of settlements, such settlements, not only in Canada, but throughout the empire, similar groups of women are meeting. In the back blocks of Australia, on the burnt lot of South Africa, the women are working with one object and one aim in view. The war will not be won by knitting socks and making quilts, but the war will be won by that same spirit of self-sacrifice that drives not only the men, but the women too, to greater and greater efforts as the war clouds thicken and the news grows worse. Worsley is not a wealthy settlement, and life at best of times is hard enough there. But the women of Worsley have one priceless possession, freedom, that has been lost to so much of Europe, freedom that the Russian women are fighting for today. And this is an example of some of the quilts that were made and sent to Britain and to the Low Countries. Many of them were very utilitarian. So they could be easily overlooked at an antique store or at a flea market. But each of them have this tag that is sewn in the corner of the quilt. Now these tags are really tiny. They're about 1 inch by 1 inch. And that's what makes this quilt historic. This quilt is actually a whole cloth quilt. It was made by 4 feed sacks that were opened up and then sewn together. And you can see, maybe you can see the seam in the middle. And the tag on the back is there. So quilt making, not only did quilts go from Canada to the Low Countries in Britain, but they also went from the American Red Cross to the Low Countries in Britain. And this is an example of one of those quilts. It's a wool quilt. And this one is from Eugene, Oregon, and that is the American Red Cross tag that is sewn on there. This is another quilt and the tag, and this one is from, let's see if I can read that, Wisconsin, I think. But that's an example of the quilt that was another quilt, and that quilt is silk. Another organization that sent quilts to the battlefront was an organization known as the Bundles for Britain. This organization was founded by a socialite from New York, and they first began their benevolent effort by knitting, but they quickly went to quilt making, and their slogan was "A bundle for every bomb." And they were nationwide. As I say, they began in New York City, but they were nationwide. And I believe that they were also responsible for some of the victory quilts. And in honor of Fala, who was President Roosevelt's dog, they even established chapters known as Barkers for Britain to help raise money for the war effort. And there is a red, white, and blue Fala quilt. So victory was this V for victory symbol that was popularized by Winston Churchill could be found everywhere in magazines, in newspapers. There was V mail, there was V letters, there were V cards, and this victory symbol was promoted by Bundles for Britain, and I just want to quickly show you some examples of some victory quilts. This particular one is made of silks that were meant to be silk pillow tops, and there you have the V for victory, the eagle, and the Morse code for V. This victory quilt is a child-sized victory quilt. And this is kind of a funky quilt. I think maybe children were responsible for cutting the V's and the stars. The next quilt is a quilt, and there's a close-up to that, and you see night shift war workers sleeping, and then there's the V for victory. And then the next slide is the Farm Journal pattern made-up quilt for victory. Another quilt that, another group that sent quilts to the Red Cross and to Britain is the IODE, which is the Imperial Order of the Daughters of the Empire. And there's a close-up of their tag that was sewn onto this. This is a kind of a bunk quilt that you could either sleep on or you could sleep under, and it's all wool, and it is also tied. It is not quilted. And these two quilts were made by an organization known as the Mothers of World War II. These are actually crib-size quilts, And the mothers, World War II began in 1943 in Indiana. And within a short period of time, they had 16,000 members nationwide. And quilt making was one of the things that they did. And they also helped their daughters and sons to transition back into American society after the war. So I believe that these child size, these crib size quilts were probably made for the baby boomer population. The organization went right through until 1963, which was about a 20-year period. And just in case you think our daddies were just fighting a war over there, in 1946, this is a picture of war brides that came from America, from nations all over, from England, France, Persia, India, Australia, and Italy, and many other countries, bringing American offspring back to their daddies. In all, there were, on this day only, there were 412 war brides that arrived in New York City after the war with their war babies. Thank you.